And welcome everyone to Beyond the Forecast, as we are going to dive into more science and more weather. And this week we are continuing our theme of go along with Earth Day, and that's what today is, Earth Day. So we are talking about climate, we're talking about climate change, carbon footprint, everything that goes into the weather and science, basically, of our Earth and what we can do to help better things. Now, today, meteorologist John Gross, he is going to take you into the difference between El Nino and La Nina and what they mean to us, what they mean to you, and what they mean to different parts of the countries when they are active. So meteorologist John Gross will deep dive into El Nino and La Nina. And then he's going to tell you about air masses, because they play a part in El Nino and La Nina, but where the air masses come from and how they impact us across our area, but also across the United States and North America. So we'll have those two things for you here coming up for today's episode. But before we get to that, let's talk about this day in weather history. And this one's not too far back, but 2011. So April 22nd, 2011, Lambert International Airport in St. Louis experienced extensive damage as it was hit by a group of tornadoes. I remember this as I was only 4 years into the broadcast business, but blowing out windows in the main terminal and tearing off the roof of one of its terminals, 5 people were taken to the hospital with minor injuries. I do recall this as it was one of the impacts on a bigger city with tornadoes that I can recall. But yeah, that one was a scary event for sure. But that was this day, April 22nd in 2011. Now, trivia time. Yesterday, we asked you, what is a high-pressure system that traps hot air underneath it called? Is it a heat dome? Is it a hot spot, summertime, or heat wave? It's a heat dome. Yeah, you'll hear us refer to that quite a bit in the summertime. High pressure kind of sets up and is just a big old expansive area of dry, warm air, and the temperatures are very warm inside of that heat dome. So that is the heat dome. Today's trivia question: what is a large area of low pressure and cold air surrounding the Earth's poles called? Now, you'll hear us refer to this one every now and then, but it's mainly wintertime. Is it A, continents, B, polar vortex, C, the oceans, or D, the cold group? QR code right there. Hit it with your phone and you can put in your answer and it will show you which answer is correct. But we'll also have the correct answer for you tomorrow. But again, what is a large area of low pressure and cold air surrounding the Earth's poles called? Those are your choices. Weigh in. Now, viewer photo of the day brought to you by Great Rooms, and today's picture comes from Megan Hughes. Megan sent in this amazing picture of the moon and a bald eagle, and she titled it, "Eagle in a Tree Staring at the Moon." Beautiful photo. Thank you so much, Megan, for sending that in. I wonder if that eagle's contemplating the moon, or if it's actually just looking for food. But regardless, thank you, Megan, for sending that in. And also, thank you to Great Rooms for sponsoring viewer photo of the day. Now, coming up next, we are going to send it over to meteorologist John Gross, who is going to explain to us the difference between El Nino and La Nina, and when we see those patterns, what it means for you. What kind of weather will you see? What season will that lead you into? We'll have all those details right after the break.
Hey there, everybody. Meteorologist John Gross, and today we're going to be talking all about what exactly is the difference between El Nino versus La Nina. Now, you've probably heard of these terms before, but what exactly do they mean to you? What exactly do they mean to me? Now, when we're talking about El Nino versus La Nina, we're looking more at the climatological side of things versus the weather side of things. Now, remember, weather, you're looking more at a day-to-day forecast. When you're looking at the climatological side of things, you're looking at a longer period of time. So you could be looking at a season, you could be looking at a year, and you're looking at how these things, the main things when you talk about with El Nino and La Nina, temperature and precipitation, how are those compared? Overall during the season, let's just go ahead and say during the winter season. Are the temperatures warmer than normal? Are they colder than normal? Precipitation. Are we seeing more precipitation than normal? Are we seeing less precipitation than normal? Those are the two main things we're talking about with El Nino versus La Nina. But another thing that you could even talk about, especially as you're going into the summer and fall months, is the orientation of the jet stream versus El Nino and La Nina, and how our hurricane season might be shaping up depending on what we are seeing as far as temperatures in the Pacific Ocean go. That's where we have to start. Remember, when you're talking about our weather patterns across the United States, that is all associated with how our jet stream is oriented. That's what we call the westerly winds in the mid-latitudes of Earth. That's how our systems propagate. Well, from west to east, hence why we call them westerly winds. And it all starts, El Nino versus La Nina, we have to talk about the oscillations, or at least the temperatures, in the Pacific Ocean. Now, if you're talking about above average temperatures, warmer temperatures, you're going to be looking more at an El Nino pattern. If you're looking at colder temperatures setting up in the Pacific, at least areas near the equator, that's when you're going to talk more about a La Nina setup. So that's going to be the differences between the two. And remember, those temperatures orient where our jet stream currently does reside. But remember, this is looking more at a climatological standpoint. So it's not going to be like it every single day, but over a season, we'll go ahead and talk about the winter season here. This is what we would see over time, especially during the winter months. So let's go ahead and start with the El Nino side of things. So when you're talking about the jet stream, usually you're talking about better chances for an area of low pressure just off the coast of the Pacific Northwest. So that's going to orient your jet stream to go a little bit farther north, especially areas into the northern tier of the country, as you're going areas from the Pacific Northwest and even back towards the Great Lakes. So you're going to be talking about those warmer than normal temperatures. Compare that to areas into the southern tier of the country, from the Four Corners going towards the Mid-South and even into the Southeast. That's also going to help to bring in a stronger feed of moisture. So you're going to be looking at some cooler temperatures, at least cooler than normal, areas near the Gulf Coast, as you're going areas from New Mexico, Texas, and even towards Florida, just to name a few states. And as we're talking about the precipitation side of things with El Nino, again, when you're talking about a big ridging pattern, that's your jet stream. Remember, again, as you're going a little bit farther into the northern tier of the country, overall, you're going to be looking at drier than normal conditions compared to areas as you're going a little bit farther south, again, from the Four Corners, areas near Texas, near the Gulf Coast, into the southeast. Over time, throughout the winter season, you could expect to see at least wetter than normal conditions. We're going to have a little bit more moisture to work with in those conditions. Let's go ahead and talk about the La Nina side of things. So that's the El Nino. Let's talk about La Nina. So now again, you're focusing on what the temperatures, the oscillations in the Pacific Ocean are looking like. And when we're talking about more of the La Nina setup, we're talking about more of the colder than average temperatures. So now, instead of more of an area of low pressure centered right there in the North Pacific, you're going to be more oriented towards an area of high pressure. So that's going to bring our jet stream a little bit farther off to the south. So areas, again, going into the northwest, even back towards the Great Lakes. That's when you're going to be talking about colder than normal temperatures compared to areas where you're going a little bit farther south, near the Mid-South, going into the southeast. That's where you're going to be talking about instead some warmer than normal temperatures. Our jet stream is a little bit farther northerly oriented, so that gives us the better chance, areas near the Gulf Coast, at least in a La Nina setup, for the temperatures to be a little bit warmer than normal. Remember, this is a climatological side. We're looking at the entire season as a whole versus a day-to-day forecast. As you're looking at the La Nina setup again, you're going to talk about those wetter conditions, so a stronger moisture feed a little bit farther north. So areas near the Pacific Northwest, that's going to be more of a rainy season, or at least a rainy time for you, and even still back towards the Ohio River Valley, going areas near the Great Lakes. You're talking about a better chance for a wetter season, especially going into the winter time, so that could mean more snow for areas near the Great Lakes. And even still, as you're going a little bit farther south, that moisture feed, it's going to be a little bit farther north. So chances are there for some drier than normal conditions, especially areas from the Four Corners, again, near the Gulf Coast, Texas, near Florida, and even going there into the southeast. So that's the difference between El Nino versus La Nina. But just remember again, when you're talking about these types of things, or at least these setups, this is looking more at a climatological side of things. We're looking at a season. We're looking at a year. That's the difference between the weather side of things on a day-to-day basis versus the climatological side of things, looking more, again, at a season or even a full year's forecast. I'm meteorologist John Gross reporting for Beyond the Forecast.
Thanks, John. Now, coming up next, John will take you into air masses and how they relate to El Nino and La Nina and what they come from and how they impact you. We'll have that right after the break.
Hey there, everybody. Meteorologist John Gross, and today we're going to be talking all about different types of air masses and where exactly do they originate from, because depending on where you're located on planet Earth, you usually will encounter different types of air masses depending on what type of climate you're usually more accustomed to, depending on your location on Earth. So there are two main types. You have your maritime air masses, which are usually found over a body of water, and then you have your continental air masses, which are usually found over any type of landmass. So let's go ahead and talk about the different ones, and whether you're talking about a warm and tropical air mass, whether you're talking about a drier air mass, or whether you're talking about a very cold air mass. Again, just depending on where you're located, and that's what helps to tie into the climatological side of things. So there are 5 main ones we'll touch on. Here's a look at the first one. You're talking about maritime tropical air mass. Now, usually with the word tropical, you're talking about some warmer conditions, hence warmer bodies of water, because you're talking about the word maritime. So here's a look at where some of those do originate from. You're talking about areas from the Gulf. You're talking about areas from the southern Atlantic Ocean, the Caribbean Sea, even the southern Pacific Ocean. These are some spots that we're usually talking about, again, that warmer air mass over the water. And especially for us in the United States, this is a very key thing to watch when we're getting into hurricane season, because that's one of the main drivers that you need for a hurricane to not only develop, but to stay strong. You need very warm sea surface temperatures. So that's one main thing that we're talking about with the maritime tropical air mass, again, over bodies of warmer water. Now let's go ahead and focus on the continental tropical air mass. So again, continental, you're talking about over a land mass, and at least the continental tropical, especially areas throughout Northern America, a little bit more susceptible to areas going throughout Mexico, or at least northern Mexico. One of the main examples that we do talk about during the summertime is the North American monsoon season. So when you hear the word monsoon, you think of a very moist air mass. So that's usually what you're talking about, a lot of warmth and a lot of moisture. Again, originating from a continental tropical air mass, originating over a certain type of landmass. So that's looking more at the tropical side of things. Again, those warmer air masses over bodies of water, and even several different types of land masses. Let's go ahead and focus on some colder air masses. So now we're talking about the maritime polar. So remember the word maritime, that's over a body of water, and then polar, you might have heard of the polar vortex, to say a few words. That's kind of looking at, again, usually colder temperatures. So here's a look at where some of our maritime polar air masses originate from. So typically, you're talking about colder, again, colder bodies of water, polar, using that word. Some of those main originating areas, you could be looking at the northern Atlantic Ocean, you could be looking at the northern Pacific Ocean, you could even be looking at the Gulf of Alaska, but all 3 of those have one main word in common: northern. So as you're going farther north in latitude, remember temperatures, at least on a climatological standpoint, those are getting a little bit colder. So that's why you're talking about some of those colder air masses. And usually, again, you're talking about the northeast going towards the Great Lakes and even the Pacific Northwest, where you have a little bit of a better chance to talk about chances, especially as you're getting into the winter months, not only for some rain, but even frozen precipitation, and that also could help to lead into chances for some snow. So that's the maritime polar. Let's go ahead and talk about the continental polar. So here you are talking about a landmass, usually as you're going a little bit farther north, and the main one, at least into North America, as you're going north of the United States, is Canada. So that's going to be one of the main spots you're talking about, continental polar air masses. So where do they originate from? These are typically oriented from colder and dry areas of land. So you're not always talking about snow-covered areas. It can be a drier area of land, but still much colder in temperatures. So like we were mentioning, areas from Alaska, the Yukon, Northwest Territories, and even still as you're going farther north into Canada, even into the Canadian Rockies. That's where you can talk about some of that colder air moving down from Canada, especially into the northern tier of the United States, and that can also help to really help cool us down during a period of time. If you're talking about colder air masses moving in from the north, that is going to result in some much colder temperatures, especially areas as you're going farther throughout the northern tier of the United States. Last but not least, let's go ahead and talk about the continental Arctic air mass. So you've heard of polar, so you're thinking cold, but now when you're talking Arctic, that's even colder than your polar air mass. So continental, so you're over body, or I should say areas of land. So now you're starting to get into areas even farther north, closer to the Arctic Circle. And remember, as you're going farther north in latitude, temperatures just climatologically, they start to get colder. So now you're even talking about a colder air mass moving in. So this is typically originating from very cold areas, such as areas closer to the Arctic Circle regions where there is snow, where there is ice. So that allows the temperatures with these air masses to even be colder. If we're talking about, you might hear us say sometimes, we have a big Arctic blast on the way, especially going into the winter months. That's usually referencing a continental Arctic air mass moving well from the north, areas farther south, and that's also a time where we could talk about temperatures. Again, especially more towards the winter months. We'll go ahead and reference us here in Michigan when you can get temperatures, wind chills near zero, well below zero, negative double digits, things of that nature. That's when you're really starting to talk about those bitter cold temperatures when you're talking about continental Arctic air masses. So that's all the differences. Remember, you have maritime, you have continental. Maritime is over a body of water. Continental, you're over a landmass. And then you have tropical, polar, and Arctic. Tropical, you're talking about that warmer air mass. Polar, you're still cold, not technically needing snow or ice, but when you start to talk about the Arctic air mass, that's when you really start to get those really cold temperatures. I'm meteorologist John Gross reporting for Beyond the Forecast.
Don't go anywhere. After this break, we're going to be wrapping up Beyond the Forecast here for Earth Day. And welcome back, everyone, to Beyond the Forecast. Hopefully, you got a lot out of today's show. We do appreciate you being here with us. Usually, this is a section where we put in a new podcast or a little spot of a podcast with me and meteorologist Haley Fischetti, but don't have a whole lot of time. So with it being Earth Day, we just want to say get out there and do some science and some weather and give back to our Earth, as it gives a whole lot to us. So whether it's planting a tree, raking up the yard, getting it ready, preserving things, making a rain gauge, weather station, whatever it is, think about Earth Day, what it means to you, and how we can help the Earth, and also the weather and science behind it. Because there's a lot of things that we are learning with weather and science that we can do to help the Earth, because it is kind of an important thing. We live on it every day for a long time. So with all that being said, for meteorologist John Gross and also meteorologist Haley Fischetti, I am Chief Meteorologist Michael Stevens. Thank you for being here with us today. And tomorrow we'll be back with more Beyond the Forecast from 4:30 to 5. Be good, stay safe, take care. We'll see you all tomorrow.